Hey guys, welcome back to Matthew Vinyl. This is part 2 of me showing my Beatles vinyl collection. Of course, this part is my singles and EPs, part 1 was my LPs. So let's get into it. Starting off with the singles, we have these two flexi discs from the US from 1982. There was 3, but at the moment I've only got 2. As you can see, the first one is Beatles 1962 to 1966 course in connotation for the Red album. And it does have All My Lovin' and You've Gotta Hide Your Love Away. Of course, it does have a little image there as well. When you open it up, you get a little image of the Beatles there. Of course, with this one is to promote the 1967 to 1970 Blue album. It contains Magical Mystery Tour and Here Comes the Sun. Just like the last one, you can see the image like that. But the first proper vinyl I have is My Bunny from 1964. This is not obviously when it was recorded, but this is the US release date, and it's back with the Saints Go Marching In. Of course, these two songs were recorded in the early 60s whilst the Beatles were in Hamburg, Germany. Next up, we have Ain't She Sweet. This is a German pressing from the mid-70s, I'd say, and it is backed with If You Love Me Baby. And of course, again, these two were recorded whilst the Beatles were in Hamburg, Germany in the early 60s with Tony Sheridan. As you can see on If You Love Me Baby, it does say there, Tony Sheridan. Next up, we have a UK 1982 picture disc of Love Me Do, backed with P.S. I Love You. Of course, this is a reissue on a picture disc, and this did get quite high in the charts. Of course, throughout the 80s going into 1990, EMI did release the Beatles on picture discs for each of their singles. The early ones are quite easy to get, but the later ones are not. Next up, we have the UK copy of Please Please Me, backed with Ask Me Why. Of course, this isn't an original. The original was on the red Parlophone label with a different mix, but this is still an early copy. Next up, we have another copy from Italy. This is an original. And again, same single, it's Please Please Me, backed with Ask Me Why. Next up, we have another copy. This again is another 80s picture disc from the UK. Again, same single, Please Please Me and Ask Me Why. Next up, we have a UK copy of From Me to You, backed with Thank You Girl. Next up, we have one of the most well-known Beatles songs. It is I Wanna Hold Your Hand, backed with the great B-side of This Boy. Next up, we have the Canadian copy of I Wanna Hold Your Hand, backed with I Saw Her Standing There. Of course, this is how it was released in North America. Next up, we have another copy from Canada. This is Please Mr. Postman, backed with Roll Over Beethoven. Next up, we have another Canadian issue. Again, this is All My Lovin', backed with This Boy. Yet again, staying with Canada, we have an 80s reissue of Twist and Shout, and it is backed with There's a Place. Next up, we have a US copy of Do You Want to Know a Secret, backed with Thank You Girl on the Oldies 45 label. We have Can't Buy Me Love on the UK Parlophone, backed with You Can't Do That. Two great songs from A Hard Day's Night. Next up, we have a UK 70s reissue of A Hard Day's Night, and it is backed with Things We Said Today. Two phenomenal songs, and that is what the EMI Parlophone 70s label looks like. We now have a US copy of A Hard Day's Night, pretty beat up my copy, still plays through fine though, and the B-side on this copy is I Should Have Known Better. Next up, we have a 70s reissue of I'll Cry Instead, backed with one of my favourite Beatles songs of all time. It is, of course, I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, a phenomenal song sung by George Harrison. And staying with the United States of America, we have And I Love Her reissue on Apple from the 70s, and it is backed with If I Fell, an absolute great single. And we have a UK issue of I Feel Fine, backed with She's a Woman. Again, two great songs. Similar to the one before that, we have a US copy of Matchbox with Slow Down from the 70s. This is a reissue, of course, on Capitol. Next up, we have one of my favourite songs from the Beatles for Sale LP. It is 8 Days a Week on the 1970s Apple reissue from the US, and it's backed with I Don't Want to Spell the Party. Now for this next one, we have a pretty interesting story. Now I do own Ticket to Ride, backed with, yes it is, a US copy. Now I'm thinking, I've never seen this cover before. It's because it's not an official sleeve. I bought this on eBay, and the eBay seller made some certain sleeve for some of the Beatles records he was selling. Of course, it's not going to be a bootleg, it's going to be his own creative idea. I thought it was pretty cool, and I picked it up. The disc is pretty beat up. It is in awful condition. It does play surprisingly all the way through. It has lots of crackle and pops, but I don't mind because, of course, this was designed for the visual aspect of this really cool sleeve that the seller made. If you want the link to the seller on eBay, I will put it in the description below. Now we have a UK 70s reissue of Day Tripper, backed with We Can Work It Out. Absolutely phenomenal single. Next up we have Yesterday, backed with Act Naturally. Of course, everyone knows Yesterday. It's one of the best Beatles songs of all time. Next up we have Nowhere Man, backed with What Goes On. Two absolutely amazing songs on the US Capitol label. Now going to another country, we have a Portuguese copy of All You Need Is Love, backed with Baby You're a Rich Man. Pretty interesting that the Portuguese still had this red Parlophone label in 1967, but regardless, it's a very cool single. Next up, we have an original UK issue of Hey Jude, arguably one of the biggest Beatles songs of all time, backed with an absolute amazing song, which is Revolution. And again, going internationally, we have a Greek copy of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, backed with Obladi Oblada. Of course, this is very interesting. 2 White Album songs on a 45. Absolutely amazing. This is from Argentina. This is a Argentinian promo for Birthday, as you can see there. It's in Spanish and in English. And it's backed with Honey Pie. Of course, 2 songs from the White Album on this very cool, unique Argentinian single. It was released commercially, of course, but this, as I say, this is the promo copy on a nice, weird grey apple. It's pretty interesting to see how the Argentinians made it, and I love this. Absolutely, it's absolutely amazing. It plays at 33 1/3 RPM, which is quite common in South America for singles, and as you can probably see, it is pretty scratched up. You can see there, it's pretty an awful shape. The B-side is even worse condition. As you can see, there's a lot of scratches. I picked this up for £50, and I think that's a lot of money for a single, and it is, but it's a pretty rare piece, so I'm happy to have it. Although it does have all of these scratches, it does play all the way through. With a lot of crackle and pops, I would show you guys, but of course, I would get copyright strikes instantly. And next up, we have Get Back, backed with Don't Let Me Down. And staying with that single, we have a French 70s reissue. Basically, in the 70s, the French reissued all of those Beatles singles. As you can see, there's a lot. And it is on this cool French Apple label. I'm back again with another interesting international release. This is the Ballad of John and Yoko, released in Turkey. And the B-side, of course, is Old Brown Shoe, the George Harrison track. This is pretty interesting in this Turkish release. It does use the British matrices, so it sounds pretty similar to the British one, but my copy is a bit dirty, it is a bit scratched up, but it still plays nicely. And you can see it does have the original Turkish lira price right there in the middle. Again, going international, we have a Brazilian copy of Something, of course backed with the Abbey Road Smasher Come Together. Quite cool to have this Brazilian pressing. As you can see, it does have Apple written on the label there, which is even more cooler. And for this next one, I'm showing 2 at the same time. It is 2 copies of The Long and Winding Road. The one here is a US copy, and the one here is a Canadian copy. It uses the exact same mix, but the labels are slightly different. As you can see, that's the Canadian one there, and that is the US one there. For the B-side, that is the US one, and that is the Canadian one. Now, these next few releases are all from Italy from the 1970s. The A-side is P.S. I Love You, whilst the B-side is I Wanna Hold Your Hand. You'd think this would be the A-side, but it isn't. And even on the sleeve, P.S. I Love You is advertised as the A-side. In the 70s, the Italians did this series called The Greatest Story, when they reissued a bunch of Beatles singles. Some of them followed the UK route, but other ones were made by the Italians or were reissues of old Italian singles from the 60s. For this next one, unfortunately, I do not own the cover, but it is Long Tall Sally, and it's backed with She's a Woman. And for this one, we have 8 Days a Week, and it is backed by I'm a Loser. And interestingly, the A-side on the actual disc is I'm a Loser, and the B-side is 8 Days a Week, even though on the sleeve, 8 Days a Week is advertised as the A-side. Again, for this one, I do not own the cover, unfortunately, but it is I Should Have Known Better, backed by Tell Me Why. This one's pretty good. It's one of my favourite songs on the Help LP. It is I Need You, and it's backed by Dizzy Miss Lizzy. Now, not all of them were on the Apple label. Some of them, like this one, this really cool Italian Parlophone labels, as you can see there. Now, this next one has Gotta Get You Into My Life, backed by Helter Skelter. An absolute weird single, but 2 great songs. Now, this isn't actually part of that series. However, I don't have the original sleeve. On the back of the original sleeve, it does actually have the advertisement for this. So at first glance, you may think that this is part of the same series, but it actually isn't. Next up, we have a UK issue of Yesterday, and I Should Have Known Better. Of course, this is from the 1970s, as Yesterday was not a single in Britain in the 60s. And the next one we have is back in the USSR with Twist and Shout. It does use the white album photos in the back there. And of course, it is on Parlophone, just like all the others. The Beatles movie medley, released in 1982, and here is the sleeve there. Of course, it does go through a little medley, of course, of the Beatles songs from the films, and it is backed with I'm Happy to Stand With You, which again is one of my favourite Beatles songs of all time. This is the Beatles single collection that came out in 2019. I bought this in 2020 when I first started collecting records, and it is absolutely amazing. It shows every single UK single. They are housed in reproductions of international releases, and the labels are also original reproductions of these international singles. They do, however, use remasters of the original UK single mixes. For example, I'll show you the first one. This is Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. This is the US reissue. Again, it does not sound like the original US copy, rather the original UK copy. This is Help, back with I Am Down. This is a Belgian reissue. So as you can see, it recreates the Belgian label, but again, it uses the UK mixes. Hey Jude and Revolution. This is a reissue of the South African release. As you can see, it fully recreates the nice South African Parlophone label. This is the final single. You get Free as a Bird and Real Love on a nice Apple label. All the Apple releases on this box set do not recreate the originals. Obviously, this wasn't originally released, but for all the other ones, it does not recreate them. It just uses the, at the time, modern Apple label. It also comes in this nice little booklet explaining the history of the songs and also the original release date of these international releases. This is Now and Then, backed with Love Me Do. Of course, the 2023 re-recording of John Lennon's demo. With this little sheet of paper explaining the song and how it was remade, and then the back cover is his credits. The vinyl copy I bought is on the light blue with the Apple, and Love Me Do does recreate the original red Parlophone label. Just like I've seen some collectors do, I actually store mine Now and Then in the Beatles Singles box set, just so it feels more complete. So guys, that's the first part of the video done. The next part is the EPs. Starting off with the Beatles' first UK EP, it is Twist and Shout. Has 4 songs from the Please Please Me LP, and it is an original Parlophone. Next up, we have the Beatles hits. It has some tracks from Please Please Me, but of course, From Me to You wasn't on the album. Next up, we have the Beatles #1. It has the first 4 tracks from Please Please Me, and it does actually use an alternate cover. For comparison, that is the Please Please Me LP cover, and that is the EP cover. As you can see, it's a slightly different take. And next up, we have a Brazilian EP, which is the exact same tracks in the last one I just shown, but in a different order. Now this is what you call a sandwich cover. In Brazil and those type of countries in South America, they release their EPs and some singles in this sort of sandwich cover, where they would print the original sleeve, but they would have this plastic over it. And I'll show you the label here. Now this was released in 1967, however, as many of you will know, all these songs were from 1963. And interestingly, to make it even more weirder, the cover there is from the Help film, of course, from 1965. So, in a nutshell, you have 1963 songs with a 1965 picture released in 1967. Next up, we have the Japanese EP. These are 4 tracks, has Twist and Shout, Please Please Me, I Won't Hold Your Hand, and She Loves You. Of course, this is on the Apple label. I believe this was originally issued in Japan on the Odeon label. Next up, we have the All My Lovin' EP. Now that bit there, it's usually meant to be purple, I believe, or pink, but over time it does change colour. Now that might just be my copy, but I'm pretty sure it is meant to be purple. Next up, we have the Long Tall Sally EP. Of course, 4 songs of 4 covers. Now going down under to Australia, we have the Requests EP. This is not an original, but this is a 1982 reissue, I believe. With the track list in there. And if you're interested in what the Australian Parlophone label looks like, that is what it looks like. Next up, we have excerpts from the album A Hard Day's Night. It's quite cool to have the Hard Day's Night cover shrunk down on an EP size. It does have those 4 tracks from A Hard Day's Night. Now this is not an original. This is a mid-70s reissue. That is the label there. I do have an original though. This is the original. I do not have the sleeve, unfortunately. So at the moment it's in a temporary HMV sleeve. Next up we have extracts from the album A Hard Day's Night. These are 4 tracks from the A Hard Day's Night album. Hopefully you can see them there. And this is an original UK issue. Next up we have another Japanese EP. Again released on this nice Apple sleeve. As A Hard Day's Night, I Should Have Known Better, Please Mr. Postman, and I Love Her. Next up we have the Beatles for Sale EP, 4 tracks from the LP. That's the track list in there. Now my copy is Irish. The sleeve is imported from Britain, so this is the British sleeve. However, the disc is Irish. What is it there? And same with the exact same EP, we have the Japanese reissue. It is exactly the same, but just instead it's on the Apple label, and of course it's Japanese pressing. Next up we have another Japanese EP, and this has 4 tracks in the Beatles for Sale LP. It has Rock and Roll Music, 8 Days a Week, Mr. Moonlight, and Kansas City. Next up we have Beatles for Sale number 2. Now these are 4 tracks again from the LP Beatles for Sale. Hopefully you can see that there. My copy is not in the greatest of conditions, but it's still an original, so I'm happy to have it. Next up we have the Beatles Million Sellers EP. This has 4 tracks of their Million Sellers, as the title explains. Now interestingly, this EP was meant to have a different name. So when you look at the label, it actually says Beatles Golden Discs, but the name was changed before it was released to Beatles Million Sellers. Now early copies like this one have that different title, but later copies do correct it to the new title. Going back to Japan again, we have another 4-track EP. Now this one is actually an original on the nice Odeon label. It has All My Lovin', If I Fell, I'm Happy to Dance With You and Tell Me Why, with the Hard Day's Night cover there. Next up we do have the Yesterday EP that has 4 tracks from the Help LP. Now again, this is not an original, this is a 1970s British repress. And now we have quite an uncommon Beatles EP. This is the Nowhere Man EP from Britain. Again, this is not an original, this is a mid-70s reissue, but I'm still happy to have it regardless. That is the label there, that is side 1, and that is side 2. Going back down to South America with Brazil, we have this nice Brazilian EP. It does have You Like Me Too Much, Tell Me What You See, Dizzy Miss Lizzie, and Yes It Is. So 4 tracks from the Help LP. Next up we have the Magical Mystery Tour EP. This is an original British pressing. Of course, as many of you will know, Magical Mystery Tour was originally released as an EP, a double EP in Britain, and an LP in America. The LP was not part of the British catalogue until 1976. Just had this nice booklet from photographs from the films. That is the other part of the sleeve there. And yet again we are going back to Brazil with this 4-track EP with songs from the Magical Mystery Tour era. It does have All You Need Is Love, Baby You're a Rich Man, Penny Lane, and Strawberry Fields Forever. Now this pressing isn't the best sounding, but it's still cool to have a Brazilian pressed EP. Now going down to Mexico, we have this 4-track EP on Apple. Very cool to have this Mexican EP. It does include Honey Don't, Matchbox, Little Child, and I Wanna Be Your Man. So nearly every song on this EP was sung by Ringo Starr, of course, apart from Little Child. And staying with Mexico, we have this other 4-track EP. It has Dig It and Let It Be. Of course, Dig It is a very short song, so it's pretty weird to have it on this EP, but of course it does transition into Let It Be on the original album. And it's backed by paperback writer and Lady Madonna, so very cool EP. Next up, we will go into the Soviet Union. This is a 3-track EP of 3 songs from the Let It Be album. Of course, the songs in this EP does not have the English titles. I do know that one of the songs is Let It Be. I can't remember the 2, but I will put a picture here right now showing you the other 2 songs. And for the final EP in this video, we have the Baby It's You EP. This is a US copy from 1995. It does include 4 songs from the BBC sessions, and it is on this very weird looking Apple label. And that is the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching.